to participate, they have the option here at the beginning. So I guess, do we have any members of the public that are present that want to make any comments?
Ken Capron is here. I will allow him to speak if you would like.
Morning, Ken.
Good morning, and no comment today.
All right, well, thanks for joining us. Okay, so moving on, the acceptance of the July 21st meeting minutes. Everyone had a chance to review?
This is Bruce. I move acceptance.
Thanks, Bruce.
I'll second. There's Jay.
Thanks, Jay. Any discussion? Nope. All right, so we can go ahead and do the vote.
Okay, great. I think I've caught everyone as you're added, so I'll go through the list, but if I miss anyone, catch me at the end. So I'll start with Lori Brand.
Yes.
Jay Chase.
Yes.
Aaron Courtney.
Yes.
Jack DeBerry-Demas.
Yes.
Let's see, is Patrick here? No. Bruce Hyman.
Yes.
Alex. Greg Jordan.
Yes.
Maureen O'Meara.
Yes.
Patricia Quinn.
Yes.
Let's see, Marty Rooney.
Yes.
Tony Scavuzzo.
Yes.
And Donna Tippett.
Yes.
And did I miss anyone who joined that I didn't catch? Okay.
Thanks, Aubrey. Okay, item number 4, the preliminary design report set aside project collection. So in May, the TIP committee voted, as you may remember, to allocate $200,000 from the PACTS 2023 FHWA allocation for a PDR set aside for one project. And the executive committee adopted that on June 2nd, and PACTS policy committee ratified it on the 25th. So from there, we've had the PDR set-asides were due on the 17th, and those had presentations. And Aubrey, I don't know if you want to take us through everything from there.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. I just wanted to point out one item. So if you look at the scoring, which is attachment B, if you look in column 1, sub-regional priority, that question had asked applicants to communicate with their sub-region colleagues to decide on priority investments in the sub-region. And so each sub-region could allocate up to 10 points to a single project or multiple projects in the sub-region. If you saw the applications, you saw that Portland and Cape Elizabeth didn't allocate points for their sub-region, which is why those projects have a 0 in the scoring. After staff completed the scoring, but before anyone saw it, before the applicants saw it, we did hear from both Cape and Portland. And Cape Elizabeth indicated they would like to put their full support behind Portland's applications and allocate the subregions 10 points to Portland's projects. Portland indicated the city's top 2 projects were the Forest Avenue from Marginal to Park project and the Libby Town project. And then a later email from Portland suggested they would have allocated all 10 points to the Forest Avenue project. So if that were the case, Portland's Forest Avenue from Marginal to Park, which is currently in 4th, would move up to 1st place with 83 points. And Biddeford's project would be 2nd with 76 points. So the committee can decide how to take those points into consideration. And then I will turn it over to Chris Chop to talk briefly about this possibility of a holding wind transfer to fund an additional PDR project.
Sure, thanks, Aubrey. The planning committee had a creative suggestion at their last meeting on September 3rd to look into transferring an additional $200,000 from the holding wind to be able to fund another PDR project. So we looked into that and looked into the holding wind balance. Balance was about 1.4 million in mid-August. We churned through about 500,000 of that in transfers to cover project overages just in the last couple of weeks. So the balance was down to, roughly 900,000. So from a balance perspective, we felt pretty comfortable that we could transfer an additional 200,000 to fund a second project. We did also have a conversation with staff at Maine DOT. Thank you, Marty Rooney, for working with us on that. And they don't necessarily have a steadfast rule for how many projects can be in the pipeline for PDR. They did generally feel comfortable with having another project, and I think staff, PACTS GPCOG staff do as well. So that's another consideration today. I think that was alluded to in the agenda, but we did not have like a final resolution at the time the agenda went out. So that's another consideration as for your discussion and deliberations today to possibly fund 2 projects. And if so, which projects to fund using, certainly the scoring results as one input. And then ideally to have like a priority 1 project and a priority 2 project in the event that there are any snags moving forward as we proceed to the executive committee for final approval. As staff, we don't anticipate that happening, but want to make that transparent. Thanks, Aubrey.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
So we have before us these projects as they were scored, and as Chris has brought up, the option of possibly funding a second one. Does anybody want to weigh in? I have some thoughts, but I'd like to hear from others first if you'd like. Oh, Tom?
Yes, I had a question. Could you repeat the timing when the other communities threw their support behind Portland? Was that after the applications were submitted?
Yes, it was after the applications were submitted
All right.
and after the presentations took place.
And certainly Biddeford has a vested interest in the process. If I think playing by the rules, fair is fair, I think that the original outcome should stick. And again, I say that I have a vested interest, obviously, and certainly not diminishing the value of any of the other projects. So I would hope that the committee would keep that in mind. Certainly if 2 are funded, and I guess not a priority 1, priority 2, but it may be an equal priority, then I think that might mitigate the process. Otherwise, I have some concerns. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. That was basically where I stood as well, because I feel, however, the issue happened where Portland didn't have that put in beforehand, it's not fair to Biddeford, whose entire package was submitted timely, to then bump them down. So I think really the only way to make this fair would probably be to try to fund 2, with Biddeford being one of them, and the Portland, the Forest from marginal to park being the second one, if they're putting all of their points into one. Anybody? Maureen?
Yeah, so I think the problem, and I'm hoping PACTS staff will, or GPCOG staff will correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think there has been a history in the past of the subregions not always being able to get themselves organized and reviewing their projects and getting their points assigned by the deadline. And I know, and I wasn't in that meeting, I can tell you that I pushed pretty hard that our subregion actually met. And, it's summer and people were on vacation, or new staff people, or didn't know what they were supposed to be organized themselves. So I'm not going to make an excuse for the central subregion, but I suspect that this is a problem that we're going to continue to see with all of the subregions. where you're forcing towns, which is a good thing. I think it's a good thing to make towns try to work together. But the problem is that they don't always do it very quickly. It takes time. And I think I remember in the past where sub-regional points were assigned after the deadline. And because it's kind of separate from getting the application in, I'm not sure it's really as much of a compromise to the process as some people might consider it to be.
Thanks, Maureen. Aubrey?
I just want to add there, I can't speak to the history, but going forward, this sub-regional coordination for better or for worse is not part of the new framework. So this is the last time we will use this process, and it won't be part of this framework going forward as it stands right now.
Thank you. Tom?
And again, with all due respect to Maureen, I hear what she's saying, but somehow I guess we were able to organize our sub-region and meet that part of the process. So with electronic age and Zoom, I think maybe it was a little easier this time than in the past. So I don't know that that ought to subtract from this process at this point in time. As it moves forward, then certainly a new set of rules, as long as everyone knows in advance, I guess that works and everyone has a proper heads up. But to change it midstream, and I know I sound like a broken record, I guess I don't believe is fair. Thank you.
Morning, Chris.
Hi, sorry, we had some technical difficulties. I couldn't hear anybody. So I had to get one of my IT folks in to fix it. Are we talking about the PDRs
Yes.
and the central subregion? We did have a meeting, and it took place prior to the deadline. The problem was that it wasn't communicated back to PACTS until the beginning of last week. I noticed it wasn't in the scoring, so that's really what happened. Our chair is Matt of our subregion, and we thought he was going to do it. It was our understanding that the points had been, that PACTS had been notified. It didn't happen. So there was a meeting and it was done in plenty of time. It just evidently didn't get through.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
One of the things that, to me, if DOT is on board with us funding two, I think it's better that we do have two, because before we've been saying we haven't had enough projects in the pipeline. And if we have the availability and we can structure it so that they're both able to be funded in future years, I think we should try to move forward with the two. Anybody have?
I would agree.
Laura?
Erin, I think you could, it doesn't seem like there's much discussion on it. You could entertain a motion.
Okay, let's do it then. Sorry, I'm beating a dead horse. Would someone like to make the motion?
I'll make a motion, hopefully it's being done the right way, to award the two highest or the two PDR projects. One would be funded through the money from the regular tip allocation for projects, the Biddeford project, and then the second one would be allocated, as I understand it, from the holding win for Portland's Forest Avenue High Street Marginal Way project.
Thanks, Chris.
Chris, did you name both projects in your motion? I didn't quite get it.
Yeah, one would be the Biddeford project.
Great. Okay,
that was submitted
good.
by Biddeford, and then the second one would be the Portland project.
Perfect.
I gave, in the motion, Biddeford got the money from the project allocation. And then Portland would get the money from the holding win, although I don't think it really makes much difference where it comes from.
I second that.
Thanks, Jay. Marty?
again, I don't know procedurally if things should be amended, but if money's coming from the holding win, yes, it needs to go through a tip and stip amendment, but it does not need to wait until February or March to begin, whereas the new money would. If folks want to get a head start on the first or second project.
Okay, I think I understand that.
Tom's on. Tom, are you guys ready to go on this? Or do you want to wait till February?
I think we're ready to go. We're just,
If that's the case, then we would probably, as I understand what Marty said, then the money, if Biddeford's ready to go, let them go ahead and use the money from the holding win. I think that's what I heard Marty say was quicker. And then we can wait until February to get started on ours. We've got some other work that we need to do anyway in the meantime. And I'm short-staffed with the position cuts we lost this year in engineering.
Does that sound right, Marty? Okay, so Chris, do you want to amend your motion to just flip the two projects funding?
So I will do that. Biddeford will get the money from the holding win. Portland will get the money from the project allocation.
Okay. Jay?
I'll second that amendment.
Okay. Without any further discussion? Oh, Tom, do you have your hand up again?
yes, I guess either I wasn't focused or otherwise. I thought Marty said just the opposite. I thought the regular one was ready to go, and the holding win had to amend and go forward. Did I misunderstand?
No, again, when we started before today's meeting, the PDR funds was going to be from new funding that will be available when the next tip and stip is approved sometime in 2021, say February or March. But to begin the other project with holding win funds, that's procedurally, whether it's 20 days or 30 days from the necessary votes. I mean, that project certainly should be able to begin 4 or 5 months sooner.
Does that answer?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I got it backwards. Thanks.
All right, well, I think we're at this point ready to take a vote.
Erin, could I make
Erin,
one?
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Aubrey.
I'd just like to make one clarification. In the unlikely event that the holding win transfer is not approved, I'd just like to be clear on the committee's top project to receive the FHWA funding.
I think, as I'm understanding it, we want to be sure the Biddeford project moves forward as our sort of first recommendation, if you will, with the Portland right there as a 1A, so it's, as I've already heard referenced. But that's how I'm reading the conversation.
Thank you.
The clarification I wanted was just the amount of money from the holding win. I'm not sure that was part of Crispy's original motion.
I think it's 150,000. It would be the same with a $50,000 match.
Okay. So I think it would be helpful to have that in the motion.
Okay, so the money from the holding win would be 150,000 with a required $50,000 local match added to the motion.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes. Tom?
And I guess just to clarify from our end, if for some reason that the holding win money is not approved, is it my understanding that Biddeford would then have, if selected, and would then have to wait till the tip process in February or March? And if that's the case, we can wait. I mean, we just, a matter of a few months isn't going to make a significant difference from our standpoint, but certainly we can start anytime. So
That's how I understood it. Marty, is that true?
Yep, that's correct, Tom.
Okay,
Executive committee will be scheduled to vote on this on October 6th.
So Chris made another amendment, which I will second, and I'm assuming staff has this all captured nice and neatly.
I think so.
I think, Aubrey, if it's possible, maybe we can read back the completed, like what the whole motion actually will be.
I think that's a great idea. So as I understand it, the motion is that the committee ranks Biddeford as the first project and the Portland Marginal Forest from Marginal to Park as the second project. They recommend the Holding Wind transfer of $150,000. The Holding Wind funds would go to Biddeford, and the FHWA original funds would go to Portland. Just to clarify, in the unlikely event that the executive committee does not approve the Holding Wind transfer, the FHWA funds would then instead go to Biddeford. That match, Chris and Jay, what you intended?
Sounds like what I thought I was seconding.
Great.
okay. Chris is nodding yes, so great. Thank you, Aubrey, for synthesizing that for us.
Okay, are we ready for the roll call?
Yes.
Okay, Chris Branch,
Yes.
Lori Brand,
Abstain.
Jay Chase,
Yes.
Aaron Courtney,
Yes.
Jack DeBaradinas. Is Jack still here?
Oh, Jack, you're on mute.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Jack. Bruce Hyman,
Yes.
Alex Yegerman, I believe, is here. Yes.
Yes, please.
Greg Jordan,
Yes.
Maureen O'Meara,
Yes.
Patricia Quinn,
Yes.
Marty Rooney,
Yes.
Tony Scavuzzo,
Yes.
and is Donna Tippett still here? I know she had to leave
I
early.
am, yes.
Okay, great. Okay,
Thank you.
roll call take.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, so item number 5, the funding framework. We've been working on this a while. We know that AECom has been helping us along, and today we are reviewing what we hope to be a final version of the funding framework. So Aubrey, I'll let you take over from there if there's anything to do before AECom starts.
Thanks, Erin. I just want to point out we're going to go through sort of the basics of the framework, and we'll cover a couple of specific items that we want your feedback on, some that we want more specific yes or no's on. And then at the end, the goal is to approve a final framework that we can send to the governing committees for their adoption. And then after that, we will put it into the updated policies and procedures, which is sort of the next big step for this committee. And I'll turn it over to Jill and the team.
Great, thanks, Aubrey. Thanks, Erin. I'm going to share my screen. We have a PowerPoint presentation. Let's see. I have 3 screens. Hopefully I picked the correct one. All right, are you seeing the PowerPoint presentation, Aubrey?
I am seeing it. It's not in the presentation view from my perspective yet, but it's I do see the PowerPoint.
Okay, I will try this again. Is that better?
Perfect.
Excellent.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience. So hello, everyone, again. It's great to see you all. So as Aubrey mentioned, we're going to be sharing the draft framework for your review and content comment. So this is our fourth meeting with this group. And as you remember, we went through some identification of best practices, what the existing processes and frameworks look like. We'll review that a little bit more today as well. We presented some draft framework options when we last met and had a survey. So we'll show you the steps that we've gone through since we last spoke with you and incorporating your comments through the survey process in developing a final framework. So today we'll do a little bit of a reminder on the background and guiding principles of where we're trying to go with this revised funding framework and streamlining the process for all types of projects. We'll talk a bit through again, where the different processes that exist today and what this framework would be in essence replacing. And then we'll actually go through the framework itself and the various elements and application process and scoring, hopefully again trying to reduce the burden on applicants moving forward. And then we'll talk about the benefits of the revised framework and ask you several, well, 2 or 3 questions along the way, and have some points in time where we'll stop for discussion. So quickly, the little bit of background again, the idea behind developing a revised framework, understanding that there are roadway and transit and multimodal projects that are all competing for a relatively small pot of money moving forward. And there's also complex and multimodal projects, and they're all kind of evaluated through different processes at the moment. So looking at transportation projects holistically across the region is a goal, and why this committee was formed in part, and also to look through these options, and also really trying to understand and get a grasp on regional significance and regional priorities and funding projects that are regionally significant is another goal identified. And there's also simultaneously the Transit Tomorrow project that's going on that developed a vision for public transportation for the region over the next 30 years, so that there's that element that can be incorporated into the funding framework, and then also the Metropolitan Transportation Plan that's going to be started to being updated and revised in the very near future. So all of these elements are pretty timely with revising the funding framework. So based on your feedback, as well as a little bit of public feedback as well, we have had these guiding principles. You've probably seen this slide 3 times now, but based on the input that we received, we're looking to revise the framework so that it's simpler, objective, transparent, again, focused on that idea of regional significance and funding regionally significant projects, data-driven, as well as taking the burden off the applicants a bit by leveraging existing available data sets and using, developing a framework for evaluating and scoring projects based on data. So with that, I am going to show you a bit of a revised graphic that you've seen in the past that shows the current process. So you can see from the current process that transit projects, roadway projects, and non-federally funded projects, which in this case are roadway projects as well, are all going through different processes. Some are scored, some are not scored, and some are they each go through different processes. So you can see that it's pretty complex, and then there are several processes going on all at once here. So the idea again is to simplify, make objective, streamline the process. So we'll talk through what that means coming up. So at this point, I will turn it over to Michael Lahillen from FHI.
Thanks, Jill. So before we get into the evaluation criteria, we'll go over kind of two items here. The first is the threshold assessment for regional significance. This slide is essentially identical to the one that we presented last time. There's really three items that we would really highlight as for a project to be regionally significant. And the idea is that an applicant needs to do a self-assessment to determine which of the regionally significant criteria their project fits within, and they should not continue with the proposal if they don't fit within these criteria, because they won't be scoring very well. So the three are, the project serves a regionally significant origin, destination, corridor, and these are defined as priority centers and corridors by PACTS, but they'll be further defined in Transit Tomorrow, as well as the upcoming Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which is an update to Destination 2040. The second one could be that it has system-wide benefits. So thinking about the actual connections that this particular project would be making. Keeping in mind that this is a lot of different modes, so roadway, multimodal, transit, all of those are wrapped into this. So it could be a bicycle or pedestrian connection, it could be an important transit connection, et cetera. And then last, but certainly not least, is providing a meaningful reduction to greenhouse gases or improving resiliency of the regional transportation network. So this is where we keep in mind sea level rise, climate change, any of those sort of factors to make the greater Portland area more resilient, the transportation system more resilient in the future. All right, so the other item that we want to discuss before going into the individual criteria are the weighted scoring. So this is something that has changed a decent amount since we last spoke. A couple things to note. So there's 4 different categories, and my colleague Ray will be going into a little bit more detail in a moment on these. The one here, so they're essentially the same as they were last time we presented. We've changed a little bit of the wording. It's now safe and reliable mobility. It's now environmental sustainability. I think we had sustainable transportation before, but many of the criteria are the same. So as far as the weighting goes, we had to kind of triangulate from a variety of sources to determine the appropriate weighting here. We'll call this it's still draft or pre-final weighting. So if you have additional input, let us know on this subject. But we looked at the results from the TIP Committee survey that we sent out a couple of months ago, as well as the results from the public survey, and adjusted the weighting accordingly. So for instance, environmental sustainability now has a weight of 24%. The TIP Committee rated about 20%, but because of the public's very high rating of this in the public survey, that was bumped up a little bit to reflect that. So overall, we have the top weighted category is safe and reliable mobility, followed by regional access and environmental sustainability. Those two are weighted pretty closely. And then last, efficient land use has a weight of 16%. All right, so now I'm going to pass this to Ray to go into a little bit more detail about the criteria.
Thanks, Michael. So with the exception of projects funded through potential set-asides, the evaluation criteria will apply to all projects regardless of type, mode, funding source, or size. And just as a reminder, the criteria has been retooled to be simpler, more objective, focused on regional significance, and data-driven to the extent possible. So for each of the 16 evaluation criteria, there are questions to which applicants must provide responses. So the responses take the form of spatial information regarding the project location, if applicable, or a streamlined written narrative. The questions and what applicants are asked to provide in the response are shown on these following 4 slides. And so for each of the 16 criteria, projects can receive anywhere between -5 and 5 points, with some criteria capped at a maximum of 1, 2, or 3 points. So in instances where applicants provide spatial information, GPCOG staff will analyze the spatial data using consistent data sets to provide scores. And in other instances where applicants provide a streamlined narrative. A scoring committee whose composition has yet to be determined will award scores based on the applicant's ability to address that criteria. And so in your packet, we provided a scoring rubric, which is designed to help the scoring committee award appropriate scores. And scores can be assigned intermediate values as appropriate. And the TIP committee will review the scores from the staff and scoring committee to aid in making project selection recommendations to the PACTS governing committee. Next slide. Or sorry, jumping back. So just briefly, for regional access, this category is meant to measure how the transportation system helps people reach desired goods, services, opportunities, activities, and destinations. As Michael mentioned, this category accounts for 25% of all total points. So project location is required for the first 4 criteria, and a narrative is required for all of these criteria except for the access to region's active transportation network. Next slide. And the second category is safe and reliable mobility. And this category is meant to measure how the transportation system helps people, goods, and services reliably and safely travel throughout the region, regardless of mode or ability. For all criteria, applicants will need to provide the project location for mapping and a narrative in response to the questions. Next slide. Third category is efficient land use, and this category is meant to measure how transportation investments are supported by and themselves support existing or future development patterns. Again, it's more or less the same criteria that we presented in July. I do want to call out the 12th criteria, consistency with local plans. It was formerly known as supportive land use context. And based on the feedback from the committee and staff, we have revised the criteria and the questions. Next slide. And lastly, environmental sustainability. This category is meant to measure how the transportation system reduces energy consumption, improves environmental quality, and improves resiliency to climate impacts. All criteria in this category require the applicant to provide a narrative. I do want to call out that negative points are possible for all 3 of these evaluation criteria, which is a change from the draft scoring framework previously presented in July. So for example, for climate resiliency, based on the proposed scoring rubric, if the project is built in a floodplain and does not address future storm events or sea level rise, the guidance is for the scoring committee to assign potentially -3 points. And again, more of this information is included in the packet. And with that, I'll hand it back to Jill for a discussion.
Great, thanks, Ray, and Michael as well. So you've seen the revised framework, the scoring categories, as well as the max weights, and if the information presented from the applicant is location for GPCOG staff to use for spatial analysis, or if narrative responses, again, abbreviated narrative responses would be part of the application process. So we're wondering if you have any feedback on the revised categories and scoring before we move forward and talk about other topics.
This is Chris. A couple of things. Number one, this process is still too complicated for most of the towns in the PACTS region. For Portland or maybe Westbrook, South Portland, it probably would work well, but for a lot of communities that don't have the staff that we do, this is still going to be a difficult task for them to prepare applications. Another concern that I have is that the quarter-mile distance to significant transportation hubs or employers or so on and so forth, I think that distance is too low. I'm thinking maybe it ought to be a half a mile instead of a quarter mile. I got into this a little bit the last meeting. You could have a major route. For example, you look at the Brighton Avenue corridor. Brighton Avenue ends out in the Deering Corner area. But that brings an awful lot of traffic into main med centers and other areas in downtown Portland that provide a lot of jobs, entertainment, and transit. And it's also one of the most successful transit routes in the community between the normal route there plus the Husky line. So it would seem if we were going to do something on Brighton Avenue that would benefit a lot of areas, it's not within a quarter of a mile of anything, and that's going to cause a problem with the rankings. So I've got some concerns with that. The other thing is I think your point totals on the regional significance are too low. I think it should be higher. Giving tourism, entertainment in this region a maximum of 1 point seems to be low to me. The other area I have some concerns with is in the environmental and sustainability area. I think that may be too high. The reason I say that is that depending on what the project is, for example, I went to my city, everybody talks about it and thinks it's a wonderful idea, and then when you come forward and try to get money for it, they say no. We tried to raise the intersection as part of some Franklin Street work by 2 feet at the intersection of Marginal Way and Franklin to help with sea level rise. And when the city council found out how much it was going to cost, it was, I don't think we got a vote in favor of it. They just don't want to pay the money. So that's a concern of mine. I think we all need to be very sensitive to environmental issues and so on and so forth. So those are my concerns at this point in time with where we're going. But I think the biggest two are the two that I talked about, or the two bigger ones would be it's still too complicated, and the distance based to different centers of jobs, transit, so on and so forth.
Thanks, Chris, for your feedback. Just one comment on the distances. We did add a half mile option or half mile for outside of the more urban areas, and we can of course talk about how that is defined based on where locations make more sense, that a larger distance would be possible. But we did add in a half mile option as part of some of those distance-based categories and questions. So you make an excellent point, and also trying to keep with regional equity as well, on having other communities outside of the core having the opportunity to score well within the framework. So that's a good point. And the idea with providing the location of the project, it would hopefully the application process will still be simpler, and the first question will be the location of the project, and then GPCOG staff would be the one actually doing all the data analysis, data collection for the applicant. They would be required to provide some narrative responses only. All of the data would be provided through work with GPCOG staff. But others, of course, can jump in and provide additional discussion and context.
I see that 2 people have their hands up, and Bruce, I see you as well. I don't know who was first, Alex or Greg.
Go ahead, Alex. I'll go. So just to reiterate, I think we had this conversation last time about the weighting of the environmental sustainability. I actually like the new weighting, so just a counterpoint to the comment by Chris. Within that category of environmental sustainability, I see that whereas at the distribution of points, there are 3 categories: 5 for vehicle miles traveled, 2 for greenhouse gas, and 5 for climate resilience. My recommendation would be to simply move maybe 1 point from climate resilience and add it to greenhouse gas emissions. So for a 5-3-4 distribution. So anyway, I would hope that that would maintain its prominence in the scoring and weighting category. And I just had a question about number 10, and it's the efficient land use, proximity to a transit-oriented development. And I wasn't sure if we have defined that term, transit-oriented development. And I was wondering if there's a definition for that somewhere. Those are my questions, comments.
Thanks, Alex. Greg, you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. So I think I might echo what Alex just talked about strengthening the greenhouse gas emission subcategory. I think there should be a better balance between mitigation and adaptation, basically, which are the two, 15 and 16 here. But my first question really was, or my question really was related to, is there a minimum score that a project would have to achieve to sort of qualify for funding, or are we intending to just rank these and whatever funding can fund however many projects down the list is what we do? I apologize if I missed that point earlier in the process.
Just to answer that question quickly, Greg, it would be a ranking, and then it would be the decision of the committee on which projects to select for funding. And we'll go into that a little bit more further down in the presentation as well. But you're right, it would be, there's no minimum threshold of a score for a project to be selected.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Bruce was next, then Maureen.
Thanks. I think a couple of things. One is something that might address Chris's comment related to the project and the quarter mile. Maybe if we replace the word project with corridor, and because, for instance, Brighton Avenue is a discrete project from, for instance, Rand Road to St. John Street, but it is critical to the function of the entire corridor. So if we talked about the corridor within the project rather than just the project extents, then I think that addresses the problem in terms of, if it's a breeze upgrade, it addresses the corridor from Brunswick to the Portland Peninsula. So what's the job density within a quarter mile of that corridor, even if the breeze frequency increase is only from Yarmouth to Cumberland, for instance? Talk about the corridor instead of the project extents. I was wondering whether there might be a way to, under the environmental sustainability, and this might address both Chris's comment related to possibly too many points in that category, but there seems to be a pretty good correlation, but not exact, between vehicle miles travel reductions or not and the greenhouse gas emissions. Is there a way to consolidate those within the 5 points of, use that same criteria that's in the greenhouse gas emissions into the vehicle miles travel and collapse it into something combined for the 5 points, and then reallocate the 2 points from that category to regional accessibility, for instance, if we decide to. But there just seems to be some possible double counting between those, or is that intentional, or is there a way to consolidate, again, to have fewer? We started with 16 criteria in the old process, which was too complex, and now we still have 16 criteria, albeit some of them are locational, and GPCOG would do the heavy lifting related to doing the analysis. But just a couple of thoughts, and I agree with Alex. I think we've got a pretty, we don't have a good recognition of what transit-oriented development really is in the region. We've got a lot of projects that say they are, and big projects that say they are, that are proximate to transit, but not transit-oriented. So I would like to see a little bit more definition related to how that would be applied and what the what the data source for the mapping that says is available or will be available for that and how that would be done. So thanks.
And to address, thanks Bruce and Alex for the comment and suggestion on TOD. I think for transit-oriented development, you're right. We don't have a firm definition currently in the framework, but as staff we can certainly work on that and make sure that that's clear in the application process. And perhaps it's something we define in the upcoming Metropolitan Transportation Plan.
Thanks, Chris. Maureen?
Hi, thank you. I actually like what Bruce said about the transit-oriented development, and I wasn't going to bring it up otherwise, but since he said it, I'm going to go for it. I think we need to talk about density, because in the end, we know that we need a minimum amount of density in places to make transit work, and trying to talk about whether you may have an area that's already at the density that can support transit. I think you ought to be getting some recognition for that. But my main comment was on the land use impact, and it may have been covered by the package, but your description talks about plans, and I want to make sure that it also incorporates actual zoning. I mean, I think people who have actually implemented their plans with zoning and regulations to support them ought to be recognized and ought to rank higher than folks that are still in the aspirational phase.
Good point. Anyone else?
Sorry, the only other thing, thanks Maureen, that was a great suggestion. The only other thing to go back to Bruce's comment about categories 14 and 15, I think the reason we segmented those is to capture alternative fuel, alternative energy projects. So whether it's electrification of vehicles or otherwise, that where the VMT could presumably remain the same. So we just want to differentiate between those two.
Okay, looks like we're good at this point.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all for your feedback. That's excellent. Very useful. Okay. So kind of in perhaps response even to some of the questions that were asked, we've alluded to the process a bit, but here's a description and a list of the actual application or scoring process. So again, where there are locational information on projects, GPCOG staff will collect the data and do the spatial analysis to input into the scoring framework. And again, the scoring committee would provide scores to written narratives. And then the scores were reviewed and recommended for funding. And those recommendations will be sent to a PACTS governing committee. And then also approved projects that utilize federal funding would still have to be put into the TIP. So that would be the penultimate, I guess, phase for several of the types of projects, of course, depending on the type and the funding source. So just as a reminder. One element that we have discussed in the past and we asked about on the survey, and that we've been kind of talking about in throughout several of our meetings with you all in the TIP committee, we're asking about whether or not presentations should be required for projects, and we ask questions about should presentations be required for certain types of projects or for larger projects. There was generally a preference that presentations provided for larger presentations and be brief, no more than 10 minutes, and would give an opportunity for the applicants to discuss the project's regional significance, and then of course give the TIP committee and scoring committee the chance to ask questions. So there are some pros and cons associated with all of those. Cons being that it could be time consuming. Also, if it's limited to larger projects, the smaller projects wouldn't be able to provide maybe the backup or answer questions that the larger projects would be allowed to do. But there are also benefits, including the opportunity for committee members to ask specific questions about projects that maybe get to regional significance, but then also, again, bring that focus back to regional significance, provide the applicants a chance to really talk about how they see their projects being really crucial and successful within the region. So again, there are pros and cons. It's a time-consuming process, but it could really provide a benefit for a dialogue to be open between the committee members and the project applicants. An alternative that we've been talking through as well is that the TIP committee members could submit written questions, and applicants could provide written answers within a certain amount of time, again in a brief format. So that's something that would be less time consuming, but would allow that dialogue. So that is an alternative. What we'd like to do is to ask if there's any discussion about the use of presentations as part of the scoring framework, and then we'll conduct a poll to get the committee's thoughts on the use of and inclusion of presentations in the scoring framework.
Thanks, Jill. Alex?
I like the presentations. I know it's time consuming. I think back to the PDR process we just went through, and we talked about the same topic, and we decided that the staff would hold presentations and then the committee was invited to attend. I just think that we get information overload, and that, our capacity to read and comprehend everything when you've got dozens of projects. I know it's difficult, but seeing a presentation and hearing a presentation is another way of better understanding the project scope and intent. And I just think it's a great way of reinforcing the information flow. And I think if we do it in the way that the PDRs were done, it's an option to attend, but at least the staff will get the presentations, and any committee members who are interested, could get there. So I thought that worked well, and I would encourage presentations to be part of the scheme.
Thanks, Alex. Great comment. Maureen?
So I gave a presentation for this last round, and I guess I'm going to directly challenge the idea that this is time consuming. We had a schedule. Every single presentation was shorter than the time that we were allotted. I think listening to a 5 to 10 minute presentation from the applicant is much more efficient use of committee members' time than having to read through all the applications. So I think it was very, very valuable, not just to understand a specific project, but I think it's also a great educational opportunity for committee members, because you become much better, you're much better informed about what are the regional transportation issues that the different communities are working on. So I think we should absolutely be doing it as an applicant. I don't think it's that hard. If you've done your application, and I would say probably the hardest part is to make sure staff shuts us down if people start talking too long. And like I said, our most recent experience, everybody round up before their time is up, and staff, I think, did a great job moving this through.
Thanks, Maureen. Chris?
I agree 100% with what Maureen first said to start off. The second thing, I think, as far as how many presentations we actually get, I would strongly recommend that we limit it to the number of projects with preliminary scoring to a reasonable level of what the funding actually is available. I mean, we're not going to want to do 20 projects if realistically there's only going to be 2 or 3 that are going to have any chance of getting any funds. I'd like to ask a question. We keep are we going to keep the TIP committee moving forward, or is the committee that is going to replace the tech plan transit going to take over that role in the future? That's just a question I was wondering about. We're trying to eliminate committees. I just wonder if that's a better way to go than having another TIP committee.
Chris, I'll jump in on that. The way that the draft committee restructuring proposal is put together right now, and it's going through a couple more, quote readings, is that there's one regional transportation advisory committee and one of the main, which would advise the governing board or boards, and that one of the main duties of it would be to recommend funding allocations. So there would be no TIP committee going forward.
Good question. Thanks, Christina. Does anyone else have any comments? I agree. I think presentations are probably helpful to I didn't participate, but I do think that they are helpful in seeing them. Looks like we're good.
Good. All right. Then Aubrey, I believe we will bring up the poll. The poll question is, which presentation option do you prefer? Presentations, question and answer, or neither?
And can everyone see the poll? Looks successful so far. Looks like we'll have just about everyone. I'll give it another couple seconds here. Okay. Looks like a fairly definitive decision on this one.
Aubrey, did you want to have any follow-up discussion on the presentations?
As Jill and I had talked about, one of the things I wanted to clarify if we went forward with presentations is who would view them. And what I hear from the committee is they'd like to go forward with the same process we used for PDR, so that staff who are doing the spatial analysis would hear the presentations, and the Transportation Advisory Committee, as it's proposed right now, would be invited to view the presentations. If I am understanding that incorrectly, please let me know.
I don't see anybody saying anything. I think you understood it correctly then, Aubrey.
All right, great. I'll let Jill continue on.
Righty. Thank you very much. All right. The next topic is around the idea of proposed set-asides. And I will then turn it over to Price Armstrong to talk a bit about some options.
Thank you, Jill. So set-asides are a really challenging topic that we've discussed a lot. One of the fears that we had is that there's a lot of funding that flows through the TIP process, and it's for sort of, I don't know, keeping the lights on, or the transportation equivalent. So a lot of state of good repair projects, a lot of things that agencies, kind of expect some consistent level of funding, and frankly, there were concerns that having sort of fluctuations from year to year could be really disruptive. So we revisited the topic of set-asides, and the proposal right now that we have just doing the overview on the different modes is for roadway and multimodal projects, maintaining the 40% set aside that is currently used for the collector paving program. And then the remaining 60% of projects would go through the framework. And would be scored. So that's the first set aside. I guess I'll also note that projects that don't have a geographical component, they will be using a simplified version of the new framework that is forthcoming. So obviously, a lot of these categories required a location for scoring, but system-wide improvements will have to have a simplified version. So moving down to transit projects, 75% of the funds, and this was based off of historical averages of the percentage of funds used for things like operating assistance, ADA paratransit operating assistance, preventative maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. So again, these are uses where if you saw fluctuations sort of from year to year, it could be really disruptive to the way that transit agencies are providing service. So 75% of the funds are then set aside for these purposes. But then the remaining 25% would go toward expanded operations such as new bus routes, microtransit pilots, capital expansions, new technology, et cetera, and that would go through this consolidated new process. And I guess I would just finally note that there's really been a focus and a lot of discussion that we've had about really looking at performance-based planning and trying to really chart a path forward on thinking about how routes perform, how systems perform, and then making decisions moving forward based on that. So that's the sort of high level overview. I guess we can segue into the discussion if there are any questions or thoughts on the proposed set asides.
Thanks, Price. On my participants list here. Bruce?
Is there any way a PACTS GPCOG staffer could in the chat function provide what these existing numbers are based on the existing funding in terms of the 40%, for instance, roadway multimodal, what the 40% amount is per year, what the remaining is, and what the MPI funding is, just so that we can see what the percentages of the how those balance out. Obviously 40% is 40%, but does that equal 2 million, 6 million, 2 million, or is it, or what's the and the same with the transit, so that we could see what how the existing balance between these different set asides would be in terms of absolute dollars. That would be very helpful for me anyway.
No, I agree. Great.
I'll just say, Bruce, if you give me a minute, I'll pull that together while I try to listen at the same time.
Thanks, Aubrey. I'm just going to go down the line here. Alex?
I just had a question. It says PACTS MPI allocation to remain the same. I'm not sure I understand what's involved or what's intended for the MPI funding.
We actually, it's grayed out on this slide because we have another more detailed conversation about it coming next.
Okay.
Chris?
Sorry, my cursor gets lost sometimes. I've got 3 screens going. The 75% of funds set aside for operating assistance, paratransit, et cetera, under transit, can somebody explain to me how that gets allocated today and if there are plans to be any changes moving forward?
I'll start out, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that today there's a project list that's developed by the transit agencies of state of good repair, operating expenses, et cetera, and it's kind of a negotiation between the transit agencies with the caveat that a lot of these costs tend to be somewhat fixed and or rotating, you know, that a transit agency will be on sort of like a schedule for upgrading or replacing vehicles, doing preventative maintenance, et cetera. And so, and my understanding is that that process would, the proposal right now is the process would remain unchanged for that 75%.
I want to just jump in here quick. Yeah, or Chris, go ahead.
I was just, oh, go ahead,
No, I'm
Chris.
sorry, Chris Chop for a second. Chris B, hold on one sec.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up, Chris. So I'm jumping the gun, I think, a little bit. I think in a few slides, we do a framework review, but the transit operations, I mean, I think the intent is that they'll be subject to the full funding framework and the allocation process once better data collection system is in place. We don't necessarily have super reliable route specific data right now to be able to accurately allocate resources for transit operations.
So at some point, once that data is more available, this funding framework would take place for the other 75% or some portion of it?
Yeah, likely some portion of it. I think there'll still be probably, you know, I'm hypothesizing here, but there'll be likely some set aside for still preventive maintenance kind of work. But yeah, the bulk of that 75% will hopefully go into the new funding framework.
Okay, thanks. Greg?
Thank you. So just a couple of questions and then a comment question related to just this conversation. Is the set aside, or I should say the 75%, is it based on the annual apportionment of 5307 funds, or is it based on total available in a given year?
It's based on the apportionment on 5307 funds. 5337 isn't, well, I guess I should say it's also included in the, I'm trying to remember, it's not, the 5337 is also not subject to the framework, and I'm looking at the spreadsheet right now, and it is included in the 75%. So it's 5337, 5307.
I guess what I mean is, so we have our annual apportionment of 5307 funding. It's usually around $10.5 million or so, but in any given year, because of carryover, the actual amount available for programming in a given year could fluctuate quite a bit. So again, is the intent that the 75% is operative on the annual apportionment of 10.5 million growing 2% over the next few years, or is it the total amount of $5307 actually available because of carryover?
The analysis that developed the 75% number was based on the SICOP, which I would presume includes carryover. I can look through that spreadsheet and confirm that afterwards, but I'm assuming that the SICOP includes carryover, and so the 75% average that we came to would also include carryover.
It sounds like it does. So we should probably be clear about what it's being based on. The second question I have is if, and I know that some of the things we can figure out going forward, but if the projects in this category were to sort of exceed that percentage in a given year, is the 75% intended to be pretty much a hard ceiling, or are we going to dip into the 25% in order to fund existing operations? Has that question been thought of?
So I can respond just generally. I think that there's almost certainly going to be some massaging of this framework as it's implemented, and you know, sort of like some of the practical realities come out. I think that the goal of this set aside for, you know, operating and sort of state of good repair work was to make sure that there was some more sort of proactive, expansive investments in the region. And so I guess I would recommend to you all, you know, insofar as it's possible to keep that 25%. I think, you know, the intention is to really, there's a very ambitious vision for transit that's being developed through Transit Tomorrow. And I think it would be a real shame if, you know, it sort of went back so that state of good repair, you know, you're just repairing the system that currently exists, because, you know, it'll be very difficult to impossible to actually achieve that sort of ambitious vision without additional expansion investments. I guess that's my sort of high level response. I mean, of course, at the end of the day, you got to keep buses on the road, which is just a practical reality that I definitely understand moving forward.
Right. So it sounds like it's a soft ceiling is the way I'm hearing you speak about it.
That's my vision, but I would kind of defer to GPCOG staff or anyone else on the AECOM team if they have any thoughts.
I think that's a decision for this committee to make about whether it's a hard ceiling or a soft ceiling.
Okay.
Lori, then Bruce.
Well, actually, hold on one second.
Sorry, Greg.
I want to get my main point is to sort of echo, I think, what Chris Chop was indicating earlier, although this was not evident from the documentation in the packet, is that I do think that there should be a quantitative, qualitative evaluation process for the 75%. I think it's really the wrong direction to sort of let the existing system just sort of continue on without any sort of real analysis and evaluation to make sure that federal funding is going toward, you know, investing in the goals of the region and what we want to accomplish with transit in the region. So I understand, and I take Chris's point that we don't have maybe the data and an analytical infrastructure to evaluate that system yet. But Chris, can you just repeat, is it the intent that this framework would be adapted to the current system at some point in the future?
Can you clarify the current system? You're saying the
I guess maybe that all services and projects that would sort of be housed within the 70 or funded by the 75%. Is it the intent to eventually, once we have the infrastructure, to evaluate that system through this framework when we're able?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Can our documentation speak to that? Because I don't think I saw it in there unless I missed it.
I know it's in the presentation, and it's definitely in the documentation in the packet that went out. I can look for the page numbers.
And we have one more thing. I think we should have a time frame and a set of milestones to get us there. Just
I would agree, Greg. When I was reading through it, I was kind of struck that, you know, 75% of that money would be going through the same process it's always been. It seems like we've done a lot of work to try to come up with framework that is going to help make the region better, and to only do 25% of the funding for transit didn't feel like we were going all the way with what we're doing. So I think while I understand that it sounds like we need some better data to help with that, make that feasible, I think we should have some milestones in there so that the plan is to get to a point where most of the projects being funded are going through the framework process, the funding prioritization framework.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Lori?
Thank you. I had a couple of concerns. I heard that the SICOP was used to come up with this set aside for 75% amount. The SICOP includes discretionary grant awards. So you need to take that into account. If it's 75% of formula, you need to take that into account. So I'm just worried that the 75% is included discretionary awards that might not be a sure thing in the future.
Just to respond quickly to that, it was only formula 5307 and 5337.
Okay, I think that should be made clear on the slide and in the policy.
Okay.
Thanks, Lori. Bruce?
I wanted to bring up similar points to the last two that Greg made in terms of the 75% and the remaining funds, and have the document to the extent practicable in the short term break down that 75% into the different categories that are there, I'd like the milestone perspective, and I'd like the same thing done to the 5337 funds as well, in terms of the performance metrics and a framework applied similarly. It might just be a high level, but some of the same guiding principles applied to the 5337 in terms of performance of the routes and things of that nature. So thanks.
So the 5337 funds can only go to Casco Bay Lines and NEPRA, and I don't know if either agency is on the call here. So and there already is a formula as to how those funds are split. So I don't see where that would make any difference. I just want to point that out.
But Greg, go ahead. I think you had a response.
Yeah, just to further clarify that, the 5337 funding, you know, is the services or modes that are eligible for that today only include Casco Bay Lines and NEPRA, but it's the mode issue that is operable on that distinction. And when and if we have either light rail or BRT in our region, that funding would be qualified for that service as well. So we should be maybe clear about the modes to which that funding is applicable, and not necessarily to the agencies that currently get it, because that could change.
Bruce?
And I guess there is some, you know, there are different routes, for instance, within the Downeaster. There's the Brunswick to Portland service, for instance, that connects to Boston, but is, you know, so there's different performance parameters that could be applied to different elements of the different routes. And I'm also emphasizing Greg's point that it's, right now it's operator specific, but as Greg says, it could expand to different operators. So thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I've got another meeting at 11 and I'm going to have to get off today. I just want to say thank you to everybody before let you know where I'm going. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Aubrey?
I have the numbers that Bruce requested. I think putting them in Q&A is an interesting possibility. Maybe I'll read them, and then if that feels too complicated, I'll try another route. But so starting with FHWA, the 40% set aside is about 1.6 million annually, and the 60% remaining funds is about 2.5 million. That total is just over 4 million, and that has been pretty consistent from year to year. And then the state funding, so that's federal funding, the state funding that goes to MPI currently is about 1.6 million. And these figures do not include any local match. This is just the actual FHWA and state funding. On the transit side, and then anyone else can correct me if I'm wrong, I think I pulled the right numbers from the spreadsheets we had going, but the 75% set aside, the FTA funding fluctuates a little bit more, but is about 8.2 million, and the remaining 25% is about 2.75 million. So the total is about 11 million a year. Is that helpful, Bruce?
Yes, very much. I guess one of the questions I had in asking for those data are, you know, some things in the transit FTA money are eligible to be spent on, for instance, bicycle, pedestrian types of accessibility projects. And some things in the FHWA are eligible to be spent on transit supportive elements. Is there any way, are we drawing a firm line between the FTA money and for transit agency type projects versus the FHWA and only the municipal application types of projects? Or is there it might be jumping ahead, but is there a way that it's thought of that some of these funding categories can be blended to get a best outcome? For instance, on our Brighton Avenue project, for instance, has probably $1 million plus of elements that would be transit supportive, but they're in the FHWA. But if they might be eligible for FTA funding, is there a way to blend those funds so that we have a best outcome in terms of a project, for instance, and not be, because we're looking at $2.5 million for multimodal and roadway projects, which is pretty minimal, and the other transit money, for instance, dwarfs what the multimodal potential projects are. So thanks.
That's an excellent point, and the intention is that all projects, regardless of mode, that go through the scoring framework will be scored through that framework, and then the best funding, best and most appropriate funding source or sources would be determined in the project selection process. So yes, there is opportunity for blending.
Anyone else? I don't see any other hands.
Okay, then Aubrey, I think maybe it's a good time to, we're running low on time. Maybe we should talk about MPI next.
Sounds great. So now you can see that everything else is gray and MPI is black and bold. And just because I know several people on this committee probably aren't familiar with MPI, which is the PACTS Municipal Partnership Initiative, I'll just give a brief overview. That program, as you've probably gathered, uses the state funding right now. It's designed to fund road reconstruction or rehabilitation on collectors or arterials to bring them up to the standards to make them eligible for pavement preservation programs. So currently, like I said, the annual allocation of state funding goes to this program, and then there's a minimum 50% local match. As far as how project selection works for MPI right now, each subregion has the first opportunity to submit one or more projects for MPI funding. And then the intent is to fund at least one project from each subregion, and the goal is to allocate $400,000 to each subregion. After that subregional deadline has passed, if there are leftover funds, all municipalities are notified and eligible to submit projects for the remaining funds. And there's I believe, a brief application checklist they complete for that. And then projects are selected on a first come, first served basis, taking into account safety, economic development, and some other factors. And then projects that meet the criteria, again, are funded on a first come, first served basis.
And Aubrey, you may have mentioned this, but there is a complete streets emphasis, but it's not necessarily currently a firm requirement, as it's a $400,000 allocation per sub-region, and they can kind of do what they want with the funds, assuming funds are available.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, I'll send it back to you, Jill.
All righty, thank you, Aubrey. So we do have another poll here associated with the Municipal Partnership Initiative, MPI. Aubrey, I believe you'll be pulling it up to get some feedback, but we might also want to have an opportunity for a bit of discussion, but we are, of course, out of time as well. So I think we need to comment on that.
Oops, I'm on mute. I'm pulling up the poll here, and just to be clear, I explained the PACTS MPI process as it stands. We could have the MPI projects go through the new framework. We could have them stick with the process they have right now. And then if they go through the new framework, all projects could go through and select projects from the entire region, or we could still keep the sub-regional split and have projects go through the framework within each sub-region. And so I think I'll just go ahead and do the poll, and then if we have additional discussion after that, just keeping time in mind. So I'm going to launch the polling right now. Give it another few seconds here. Oh, just got another one. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and I'll show the results. This one is not quite as definitive as the previous poll, but does have definitely a leaning towards using the new framework for NPI. Does anyone want to have any discussion about that?
Well, I know Chris isn't on the call anymore. I wish he was, because I feel like he would be able, he was one saying that this new framework was still confusing, and I don't know how confusing it is for some of the smaller towns to apply for this MPI funding. I don't know what they have to do now exactly. You may have said it already, but I didn't catch it. So I just wonder about that for them. Maureen?
So I voted for using the new funding because I do think we should really be working hard to make sure our investment is regionally based. But I know that Chris has made some comments about how the framework we're getting is really going to be very, very focused on the urban areas and probably not put a lot of money into the suburbs. And I'm actually okay with that. But I chose the division by sub-region because it felt like an opportunity to balance it out a little bit.
Thanks for that. Helpful. Alex?
Yeah, I'm sort of with Maureen. I like the regional, sub-regional allocation kind of gives the, now I'm in the northern sub-region, so it's an opportunity to get some funds for projects that we might not otherwise get. I'm sort of channeling Chris on option A, which is keep it simple, stupid, and not sorry, stupid, but I voted for number 3 because I think that if we're going to create this allocation formula process, we should use it within the subregions. But I felt kind of conflicted and wanted to vote number 1, but voted number 3. So it's just, that's what I thought.
I was there too. That's what I ended up doing. Tom?
Yes, if I may, I've been listening, and I'm not trying to echo what Chris might have said, but from an MPI perspective, in Biddeford, for example, applies for those quite regularly. I think the intent of the MPI program is to come up with funds for preserving roadway and roadway surfaces, and to make it too complicated, I think would just subvert the process substantially. We can't get enough money to keep the roads up to par as it is, and we can only do a fraction of the miles that are needed based on our study that Vance Hagen does every year on road condition assessment. So to keep it simple is the best route, in my opinion, and certainly by subregions seems to have worked very well the last 2 or 3 years that it's been done. But I don't know that we want to get, well, I don't think it would behoove anyone to get real sophisticated in a point totaling and presentation for the MPI, because I think that subverts the intent. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments? We're running short on time here. I don't see anybody.
All righty, thank you. So now to summarize a bit, as we've kind of been talking through and folks have alluded to some extent so far, it's anticipated that the proposed framework will be subject to regular review and updating based on changes within the various agencies, the communities, the development patterns, funding availability, asset management plans and other federal requirements, for example. So that will be something that needs to be, kept on top of moving forward. And also, as we discussed, the transit operations the hope is that once an enhanced data collection system and data analysis system is in place, that the operating funds, again, that potential 75% set aside, or a major portion of it, would be subject to the full funding framework once that data is available. We also wanted to talk through some benefits and changes to the revised funding framework. Again, it's a uniform process for both roadway and transit projects, which does allow for evaluation of particularly of projects that might be eligible for multiple funding sources, as Bruce mentioned, for example. So there might be some possibility of blending between funding sources that is allowed and perhaps even encouraged through this process. Again, a review of all projects through a single framework by a multidisciplinary committee, and also the goal is to take the burden off of the applicants. So GPCOG staff would take on data collection and analysis, and also use consistent data sources, which really is helpful when trying to compare apples to apples, so to speak. There also was the addition of the threshold assessment for regional significance. I think that everyone's been talking about the importance of identifying regionally significant projects to fund in order to move the region forward. And then, of course, in that vein, the revised criteria have been revised to reflect regional priorities in the new vision for moving forward in the region. But then also the idea of, again, the revised scoring criteria and the potential weighting, as well as the questions and then the rubric for actually scoring projects, both on the data side as well as on the narrative side, creates the opportunity for consistency and transparency across all projects. So those are all kind of the benefits of the revised scoring framework. To that end, I believe, Aubrey, I should turn it back over to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jill. So to reiterate what I said at the beginning, the next steps after the committee approves a final framework is to get governing committee approval, the executive and policy committee. And then the next process for this committee is to update the policies and procedures, and that the adapted framework will be incorporated into those new policies and procedures. Staff will revise the actual application that project applicants use to reflect this new framework. And then the goal is to get this implemented for the next round of both HWA and FTA project selection. So I think we can probably stop screen sharing and let the committee discuss this.
My participant list. Does anybody have anything they'd like to, while I fix what's going on here? So I think there were a number of comments that people asked to have updated into this framework. So I don't know if folks feel ready to, I know that we were supposed to recommend adoption of the final framework today. Are we there?
And one thing I'd acknowledge is that, and Aubrey spoke to this, this funding framework will be included in the updated policies and procedures. So some of these more procedural questions, I think, that were posed today can be brought into that discussion. I don't think necessarily everything needs to be approved as part of the actual funding framework that we're looking at today.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Greg?
Well, my comment was going to be, I kind of think we talked about a lot of changes today. I don't know in the end how much scale each of them really have, but I'd be more comfortable approving a final document that had all the potential changes accounted for. And as I said earlier, I do have a major one as it relates to that 75% allocation to transit and how we're going to be evaluating those services and projects going forward. You know, I guess I'd be more comfortable if this document had a very clear statement about the process to get that in place, that we were going to get it in place within a year or something. With that understanding, I'd be okay approving this today, but I think ideally we should bring it back for another meeting.
Thanks, Greg. How do others feel?
I'm just going to note that some of the comments that we received are conflicting. So we're not going to be able to fully accommodate every comment that was made today. I mean, that's often happens in processes. And aside from Greg's point, you know, I think the most major thing to figure out is what to do with the MPI program. Because, you know, we kind of had a split vote there. There was a clear direction, I think, but not precision there. So I think staff will probably give that a little bit more thought, maybe talk to a few other members that haven't been on the line today just to get additional perspectives. So Erin, I think there are two ways. One is to approve the frame. If people don't want to have another meeting, approve the framework as it is, understanding that staff will do our best job in incorporating the comments that came through today with a specific focus on the 75% and gathering a little bit of additional input before we make a recommendation to the policy committee on the MPI. Or we can come back with a document for one final meeting and have this committee look at it with all those things addressed.
Thanks, Christina. That's helpful. When does this need to happen by in order to keep things on schedule for the government, the governing bodies to vote on it as well?
Sure. I think, you know, the goal was to take it to those committees next month, which if the TIP committee doesn't approve today, we obviously couldn't do. I think another alternative could be to take it to those committees within the full policies and procedures document and have that approved all at the same time. I think timing wise that could work with the application process, assuming that we'll move forward with the framework into the application. I'm not phrasing this very well, but we'll move forward with putting the application together based on the TIP committee's feedback next month, assuming that it will be accepted by the executive and policy committee so we can get that application process started on time. But then adopt it all as all at one time with the policies and procedures.
Okay.
So
I mean, personally, I feel like I would rather see a final document with all of the incorporated changes before we approve it, really. That's how I feel. I don't know how others feel. Bruce gave me thumbs up. Greg's nodding his head. So hopefully that doesn't mess the timing up, but I think that might be the better way to go. With the MPI stuff, it sounds like it's kind of wishy-washy on where people want to go with it. So I think it would be better to have staff talk with some of the members that aren't on the call. Everyone good with that? So you don't need us to do anything then at this point, other than adjourn? No.
I see Christina unmuted. I'll let you go first.
Well, Aubrey, I just want to make sure that that we kind of confirm with this committee that we're going to move forward with designing the things that have time constraints on them with the general direction of where we're at. Just so we're going to have to walk and chew gum a little bit to make sure that we can stay on track. So while we're not asking for any kind of formal vote, I would like kind of like, thumbs up that we're generally got it down and and staff should go ahead and start preparing the things that we need to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're almost there. It's just a few things that we need to have a little bit more clarity on. So
that's great. Thanks for those thumbs up. We're going to take that as committee support for us moving forward, walking and chewing gum.
Thank you for that much more articulate clarification, Christina.
Thank you, everyone. I think this has been a really helpful meeting in AECOM. Thank you to all of you for your presentations. Very informative and helpful. So thanks again, and We'll meet again soon.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for staying a couple
Thank
minutes
you,
late.
Erin, for excellent chairing once again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Aiko.
All right, bye.